Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host, and today's topic is going to be about a recent report released by the International Cocoa Initiative about their efforts to eradicate or at least monitor and remediate child labor in West Africa, and specifically in Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, and Cameroon. Before we get there today, what I'd like to do is I would like to share with everyone that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of The Chocolate Life. You can go to The Chocolate Life, become a member. There's a button up here, green button. I'm logged in, it says account. If you go there, it'll say join, and you can become a member of The Chocolate Life. There's always a free membership tier, but if you do have the resources, there are paid membership tiers as well. I don't do Patreon, not doing network advertising. I'm not doing things like that. It is the contribution of members which help keep Pod Save Chocolate on the air and allow me to do and enable me to do the things that I am doing today. Also, no matter where you are in the world, go to the comments, whether it's the live chat on YouTube or the comments on LinkedIn and Facebook. Let me know where in the world you're connecting from. And if you have a comment or a question about anything that I talk about today, you can go into the comments and get it up on screen. And with that, let's begin today's episode. I'm going to do a little behind the scenes kind of stuff here and say for every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, there is a post, and this is the post for today's episode. Now, one of the things that happens in this post is that I will provide a run of shows. So we'll be talking about the things. So it'll go through the things that we're talking about over the course of the episode, but it will also provide links so that if you're listening to this or you want to come back later and follow along with any of the links, you don't have to pay attention during the episode. The links are going to be on the page. So what's this all about? So I correspond to a whole bunch of newsletters and news sources and things like that that provide me with information about what's going on in the worlds of cocoa and chocolate. And one of them is a newsletter which is called Cocoa Radar. It's written by Tony Myers. Tony is somebody that I met for the first time back in 2017 when I was in Shanghai for the launch of Ruby Chocolate, and he and I have met. I used to be the editor of Confectionery News, and he left there in the last year or so and has gone off to launch Cocoa Radar. And he talks about issues in the cocoa value chain, the chocolate value chain. And this is a page from one of his most recent newsletters. And if you're interested, please go and subscribe. You can, from this page, you can go and you can click on the home button and you can subscribe. But what Tony is writing about is this new ICI report, the International Cocoa Initiative report, breaking the cycle. International Cocoa Initiative report exposes the root causes of child labor and urges unified action in the cocoa sector. So Tony goes through, and I copied some of this into the post for today, but he says, okay, the root causes of child labor. We have to look beyond the cocoa farm for the root causes of child labor in cocoa farms. And ICI says that the root causes are low household income, they are high inflation, and limited access to education, healthcare, and child protection services, right? At the same time, according to ICI, is that one of the most effective measures, according to the report, is awareness raising. One of the most important, most effective measures is awareness raising. So let's go deconstruct that a little bit more if we can. So we're going to go down here and we're going to click on this link. And we're actually going to go to what it is that Tony is referring to. Here's this report, right? And there's a link to it. You can go take a look at it. It's Tackling Child Labor in Cocoa, Results of the International Cocoa Initiative's Member Reporting Exercise. So this is not external third-party research. This is the result of surveys or some sort of survey instrument or some sort of self-reporting that has been done, right, by members of the International Cocoa Initiative to talk about what it is that they have done. And we can't actually find that information on this page. What we have to do is we have to click and we can see the report. Now, I have the Adobe Acrobat extension here, so it's opening it up in Adobe Acrobat. And so we look at the ICI report, Tackling Child Labor, the results of the member reporting exercise. in 2024. So it's actually October of 2023 to September of 2024. So it's taken almost a year to release the results. And you can go through and you can figure out what it's done. And we can say the report is based on figures provided to ICI by its members, right? They represent aggregate stuff. I mean, and okay. And then we have this little footnote that says independent external auditor, PricewaterhouseCoopers, has provided limited assurance on the reporting process, covering the suitability of the design of the reporting process and the related controls implemented by ICI. Nowhere is there actually a description of the methodology. We don't get the survey report. We don't know how many people responded. We don't know anything about it. There's just, trust us, bro, this is what the report was. And so we can go through and it says, oh, you know, here's how many households that we monitored the first year, 707,000. For our child labor monitoring and remediation system in 2022. Here's how many we're doing this year. So yay, right? Members now cover more than half of COCO households with a CLMRS. That's progress of a sort, I suppose. What is a CLMRS, right? And it says that even though there are 1,168,000 households that are covered by the CLMRS, we find that there are only 973,000 children supported. There's no indication here what that difference is and why it is there. It's up from 541,000 last year. So I suppose that's good, but it's, again, we have these numbers here, right? And we don't know the full context that they're being prepared. They're being presented in. So we go through here, and further improvement in identification is needed so that more children and families benefit. And the number one question I want you to think about as you're looking at this document and related documents, including the annual report, is how does this solve the root causes? Remember, if we go back and we take a look at the root causes from the COCO Radar report, the root causes are low household income. So how does having a bigger, better, more, maybe faster, but a bigger, better, more child labor monitoring and remediation system, how does that address the issue of low household income? It doesn't, right? So how does a bigger, better, more child labor and monitoring remediation system, how does it cope with high inflation? It doesn't. How does a child labor monitoring and remediation system address the issues of limited access to education, healthcare? Now, it may address the issue of child protection services, right? But child labor, it says here, will not be eradicated without addressing its root causes. And so what we have here with the CLMRS and what it is the International COCO Initiative is talking about is it's saying the way to solve the problem is to do more child labor monitoring and remediation. That's the way to eradicate child labor, is to do more monitoring, more remediation. But there is no connection between monitoring and remediation and addressing the root causes of low household income. So what are we going to do with the living income reference price, which doesn't apply as much to Nigeria and Cameroon as it might to other countries? How are we going to address high inflation with more child labor monitoring? I don't understand how we do it. And so that's why I say that the International COCO Initiative disappoints again, right? The only thing that this report does is says, we're doing a better job at child labor monitoring and remediation, and therefore you need to give us more money so we can do a better job of child labor monitoring and remediation. There's nothing here about, oh, how are we going to encourage the members to go and do what they can to address the root causes, which are low income, inflation, and limited access to healthcare, education, and other services. So there may not be water security, there may not be food security, there's certainly not income security. Many farmers lack what we might think of as access to infrastructure, so no transportation security. There are all of these issues that are not dealt with child labor monitoring and remediation. And so that's why I think that this, and I want you to consider whether or not this report constitutes greenwashing. We have a whole bunch of companies that are part of the ICI or are building their CLMRSs in conjunction with ICI, right? And what are they actually doing? And the answer to the question is there is no way to tell from this report. Just no way to know, right? So let's go beyond this report and let's actually go to an annual report. So here is a page where the annual reports are available for 2024. If you want to go and download all of the annual reports that have ever been released, you can go do that. But what I want to do is I want to go and point out, and it's not necessarily easy to do from this, right, from that, right, viewpoint, but what I do know from looking at every report and downloading every report and most of the supporting documents is that the information that is presented each year has changed significantly. So the information that you're going to find by downloading the 2024 report is going to be different from the 2023 report, is going to be different from the 2022 report. And so we have the challenge of how do we compare the information in the reports against each other, right? How do we check to see what progress is being made? And the answer to that question is, I don't think we can, right? Which is a real problem. But let's also go take a look at something which is perhaps more interesting, right? Which is, this is the 2024 report. I downloaded the PDF. I've gone through and looked at it. And what I really want to do is I want to really go take a look at the financial reporting page. This is all the financial reporting that they do, right? In their annual report, right? So they said, oh, this is how much money we got from our members. And this is how much, this is project funds, and there's no actually indication of where the money in the project came from, how much money is in the account. There's no indication of what that is. It's just we have, this is income restricted for use on projects, right? So they earned 15 million Swiss francs in the reporting period, right? They spent 5 million on activities and operations supported by core funds without actually any definition on this page about what core funds mean. And so actually, let's go take a look. Let's go search for core funds. Let me spell it properly. I'm not oriented to my, so the phrase core funds only appears on this page. So there actually is no description of what core funds means, right? So why am I doing this? Again, let's step back and doing this. Number one, right? It's not to try to claim that what ICI is doing is not useful or helpful or valuable at some level. I think that bringing awareness to these issues is not a bad idea, right? Trying to put together programs which help, right, alleviate some of the issues is not a bad idea. It's really about understanding what is the effectiveness of the funds being used. So like talking about Tony's Chocolonely, talking about fair trade, like talking about a bunch of initiatives like that, none of them is above reproach, right? None of them, just because they do good things doesn't mean we can't say you could be doing better and you should be doing better, right? I also want to point out that there are certain sets of skills that you can learn, as I have learned, that make you a skeptical consumer of the information. And by skeptical, I'm going to mean not a gullible consumer of the information. You're going to go take a look at it and you go, that doesn't make sense, or I wonder what's going on here. And so this is an example. So when I run across a phrase like core funds, I want to know what core funds means. And it turns out that, in this document, which is their annual report, it doesn't appear that they ever describe what core funds is, because core funds only shows up 4 times and only shows up on the same page. So when they say member contributions core funds, okay, then project funds, there's no definition. And so we might go to them and say, hey guys, can I have a better description of what it means? And as a matter of fact, whoever is producing these reports should in fact do a better job of describing terms. Right. Now, these may be common within the NGO community, these may be common with certain aspects of the financial community, but you can't assume that everybody who's going to read these things has specialized financial knowledge. You need to go in and take a look at it in any event, right? So they brought in 15 million in revenue in the reporting period. They spent $10 million. They spent 15,632,000. Now I haven't added out all these columns or subtracted up these all columns, but somehow 5 plus 10, oh, maybe 3 and 1 make this 5, and then 9 and 1 make this 10. So, okay, that's, they've done that 15 million. So they lost 186,000 Swiss francs. And so they had to dip into their reserves and 238,000. So we don't know what the reserves are. We don't know anything about anything. It's just that at the end of the year, it boiled down to zero. And there's no indication here that PricewaterhouseCoopers or anybody took a look at these numbers, right? So these are unaudited numbers. And normally when you have an annual report, if you're going to use unaudited numbers, you're required to indicate that these are unaudited numbers. So even though this is an annual report, it's not an annual report because no board of directors, which had fiscal responsibility, fiduciary responsibility for numbers, would accept this, right, as the level of detail that was provided to them if they are actually required to oversee the finances of the organization. And so is it greenwashing? Not sure it's greenwashing. Are they really, really simplifying this, right, to come to a conclusion? The answer is absolutely yes. Do we know what they are? What's the difference between restricted program activities and indirect costs to support? No indication whatsoever what this is going on. And so we should ask ICI if anybody who's associated with ICI is watching this, or anybody who's a part of ICI gets to your board of directors, happy to have them on as a guest on a future episode of Pod Save Chocolate to talk about what these numbers mean and how they should be interpreted. And if there are other numbers that need to be used, if there are other numbers that are available to flesh these numbers out, what might they be? So really, really important thing to do so. So let's go take a look at this, okay? So this is interesting. So this is just another restatement of these numbers here, all right? So 69% is restricted income, 31. I don't know why we need a pie chart here when these numbers, like, okay, right? It's a graphic. But let's go take a look at this, right? Which is staffing figures. So in 2023, there were 133 staff in Côte d'Ivoire and 24 staff in Ghana, 24 staff in Switzerland. In 2024, there were 145 staff in Côte d'Ivoire, so an increase from 133 to 145. They went from 24 to 27 staffers in Ghana, and then they went from 24 to 25 staff in Switzerland. But what does that mean, right? So we actually don't know anything about salaries. How much of this money, whether it's however it's categorized here in terms of expenditures, operations supported by core funds, right? How much of that is actually devoted to salaries? And what's the difference between salaries in headquarters and what's the salaries that might be paid in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana? And so I did a little bit of looking, right? And I said, so I'm using a browser called Dia from a company called The Browser Company. They also make the browser Arc that I use. But one of the things about Dia is that there's a direct connection to a number of different large language models that you can use. So you can, without having to leave the context of browsing a page, you can ask it some questions and then you can go chat about the results, referring to the pages that you have open in your browser window, which is really, really convenient. Now, just because they're using ChatGPT and other models, I mean, that might not be the best for certain kinds of things. So I use at least 3 different models. I use ChatGPT, I use Mistral, which is out of DuckDuckGo. I'll use Gemini from Google, and I use Claude AI. So I use those, and I use each one for something different depending upon what it is that I'm doing, right? But in this particular case, I'm in the Dia browser. I've got lots of tabs open, and I will go back and forth between Diva and Arc cutting and pasting and do stuff. It's just a really convenient way for me to work. If you're interested in trying out the Dia browser, I can send you an invite. It's still in beta. Don't put your email address in the comments, but you can go to TheChocolateLife, sign up as a member, and email me, or just email me at member.support@thechocolateLife.com, and I can send you an invite to the Dia browser. It's pretty cool. And they got lots of really, really fun stuff that they're doing to make it more useful in day-to-day research. So it's designed for researchers, designed for students, designed for people who are in their browsers looking stuff up all the time. It's very, very convenient. Right? But what I did is I said, in what country is the global headquarters of the International Cocoa Initiative? And we find out they're headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, right? In their office, I've got an address for it, right? So I asked it then, because if you actually go take a look at the annual report, I'm not gonna zoom out or go back to it, is there's no indication of who the chief executives are at the ICI at headquarters in Geneva. They don't even tell you that the headquarters are in Geneva. This is the annual report. Let's find out. Right? Is Geneva mentioned? Geneva. So it talks about where they've been in terms of stakeholders and collaborations and things like that. But no, we have no idea where it is that they're located. Right? We do have some indications. Well, so we go the name of the country director for Ghana. We have the country director for Cote d'Ivoire. We have the overall ACFR director. Right? So, okay, I suppose Cameroon and Nigeria, maybe Cameroon and Nigeria don't have country directors. We also have, I think, a message from the executive director, Matthias Lang. But here's an interesting question. But there's lots of things that we'd like to know about ICI as an organization, where they're located, and who else is in the C-suite at ICI in Geneva. So Matthias Lang is the executive director. This is the sort of stuff that I would expect to see available somewhere. It's not, right, on a general basis. If you were to go to the ICI website, it's a challenge to go find this stuff. It doesn't look like there's one place where we can go do that. Although we will go and take a look at the ICI website and find it out. So we have Matthias Lang, so Vincent Chauvin, who's the finance director, Sarah Dekichi, I may be mispronouncing it. She's got a background which suggests that I might be mispronouncing it, and Jean-Yves Delaveau. So those are the four chief executives. So I asked myself, oh my gosh, I wonder what the average salaries of somebody in a C-suite, somebody in a C-suite position at an NGO headquartered in Switzerland might be. And that was the next question. All right. So salaries of ICI executives are not publicly disclosed, right, in available sources. I mean, this is a non-governmental operation. It is in Switzerland, but this has taken secrecy, financial secrecy stuff, too far. If you're putting money into an NGO who is designed to solve the kinds of problems that the International Cocoa Initiative was formed to solve, right? And it was founded over 20 years ago as a result of Harkin-Engel here in the United States in response to the Harkin-Engel protocol. And many of the companies who were early ICI members were signatories to the Harkin-Engel protocol. And this is the ICI came out of that, right? But the salaries of ICI executives are not publicly disclosed in an annual report, not in the annual report I showed you, right? I imagine that there is some reporting that NGOs have to do in Switzerland. Again, why it's private information, I have no idea. So I asked it. I asked it very quickly. What is the average compensation for C-suite positions at international NGOs headquartered in Switzerland, right? And it turns out, again, even if these numbers are off by 10% or 20%, it gives a range, and it gives us something to work with. And it says average C-suite compensation at NGOs in Switzerland is somewhere between 150 and 250,000 Swiss francs, right? Which is often lower than their for-profit peers. That makes an enormous amount of sense. But there's also this notion that while this range may be lower than their for-profit peers, there's no way to indicate whether the amount of money being paid to these four people is in these ranges. We don't know if they're being paid more. We don't know they're being paid less. We just know that for people who do what it is that they do, that this is about what they will get paid. Right? So somewhere between 150 and 250,000 Swiss francs. I then asked it, okay, how much are the employees of NGOs? So how much are the employees of international NGOs paid in Ghana and the Ivory Coast? So looking back at the annual report, if I'm going and taking a look at the employment statistics here, right, there are 133 people that are employed in 145 in Cote d'Ivoire and 27 in Ghana in this last reporting period. How much are they likely to be paid now? Right, the country directors and the overall Africa director, who may or may not be in Africa, may be located somewhere else, right? Maybe in headquarters in Geneva, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? But what we'll find is that the average program coordinator working for a nonprofit in Ghana earns about 50,000 Ghanaian francs. I believe it's Ghanaian francs or Central African francs. I'm not entirely sure what the currency there, although it may be Cote d'Ivoire is in Central African francs. But in any event, right? So the average person the average program coordinator working for a nonprofit in Ghana earns somewhere between 4,000 and 4,000 and 4,500 US dollars. And I didn't do the comparison between US dollars and Swiss francs, but it is significantly lower in Swiss francs. The exchange rate is not that good. So if we look at, let's just take 5,000 to make easier, the 145 people working in Cote d'Ivoire on staff, or in Ghana, the 27 people working in Ghana, if they make 5,000 people, let's just call it 30, that's about $130,000 a year out of a $15 million budget. So a small percentage, 1%, right, of the money which they collect each year is used to pay for salaries in Ghana. Just, rough estimate. Don't know, back of the envelope based on what it is that I was put together. In Cote d'Ivoire, it's significantly higher, right? At somewhere between $13,000 and $14,000 a year. And so if we go take a look, with the national average salary at US $6,400 a year, right? Which means NGO coordinators typically earned about double the overall country average. And so I am going to guess, if I had to guess, that not all of these people are earning the full-time equivalent, which is paid, right? I mean, I would guess that they're paid at the average of the average salary, which is being paid for across the board, not just for program coordinators and NGOs. And it may be that these are not full-time positions, they're part-time positions. And so the amount of money which is associated with these salaries is comparatively very low, right? And I took a look and did this one more step. And I said, what's the currency equivalent? So 150,000 Swiss francs is worth about 94.5 million West African francs, which is the currency in Cote d'Ivoire, and it's worth about 2 million Ghanaian cedi, which is, that's a lot of money, right? When you think about what it is that the people who get to drive Mercedes Benzes to work, right, and are living in Geneva, right, and not spending all of their time in cocoa farming countries, right, not spending time on the farms. I don't know how often the people who are at headquarters in Geneva go to the farms, right? But it seems like the salaries are out of whack. Now, I got to say, one of I think the more upstanding moves that happened in the last decade or more was that the International Cocoa Organization, ICO, moved their global headquarters down to Abidjan in Ivory Coast, which makes an enormous amount of sense given Ivory Coast and Ghana, Cameroon and Nigeria, four of the largest cocoa producing countries in the world. And so it makes sense to have your headquarters there. It reduces the overall cost of staff. It reduces some kinds of transportation and other kinds of costs. And it says that the money comes in, right, can be devoted to not supporting comparatively lavish lifestyles. So what is it? Let's go take a look at it. So if I'm earning 150,000 Swiss francs a year as one of the four members of the C-suite, that's 2,100,000 Ghanaian cedi. So in Ghana, and again, I didn't do the currency conversions, right? But the average cocoa farmer in Ghana earns about $1,100 a year, right? And $1,100 a year is a lot less than 150,000 Swiss francs. So there's more than a 150 to 1 ratio, a more than 150 to 1 ratio between what somebody working at the ICI headquarters in Geneva gets and what a cocoa farmer gets. And what that says is that the salary that this person gets would pay for 150 farmers working full time. Now, that's not necessarily a whole lot of people, right? But when you think of the number of farmers, there are several million farmers, cocoa farmers in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. 1.8 million, I think, is the number these days. But it gives you an idea of the disparity of what it is that goes on, right? And I feel that one of the reasons why these numbers are not published, right, is that it shows what this disparity is. It would show what this disparity is, right? And I think that that's a problem. So is this greenwashing? The answer is, right, what is the value that is being delivered to the average cocoa farmer who is receiving monitoring and remediation services? How does this improve their lives? And the answer is it's not necessarily clear what the value is to the farmer and to the farming family, right, that gets delivered by these services. And that's one of the reasons why I want you to consider, right, that there is greenwashing potential. Oh, we work with, ICI, we work with all these farmers, we work with all these farms, we've done all this remediation on all this children. Look closely and find out what percentage of children, are still being reported as doing some sort of illegal labor. And that's an exercise which is left as homework for the watcher. Go and take a look at the end report and see what their figures are for what the disparity is. So they're doing this child labor monitoring, and what percentage of children are found to be doing illegal labor, right? And they talk about remediation, but what are the recidivism rates? Do they go back 5 years later and keep track of this historically? They might, but they don't present the data that way. There's no way for anybody who is not looking at the core of the data to be able to say, oh my gosh, this is, we can go and we can say, we visited this cooperative, for example, we visited all these farmers, we know what the turnover is in cooperative members, we know the children, and we can say that, we got 95% of the kids in the monitoring system were remediated, and 5 years later, there was no recidivism. We didn't find any child who ever went back into illegal labor. So there's no reporting here, right, in that respect. I mean, and there is, this level of financial reporting, right, is pretty, it's insufficient, right? If this is an annual report, it's insufficient. If I were a company donating to the ICI, or an individual who's donating to the ICI, and this is all I got in the way of financial reporting, I would be incredibly disappointed. All right, so 15 million Swiss francs, let's just find out. Just like, right? So we can do this live. So convert 15 million CHF F to USD. I'm just, it's one of the great things about doing this live, and it's one of the great things about working on this. So it's about $17 million, right? So let's take that number, $17 million, and let's go take a look at something else, which is, here is a list of board members, contributing partners, and other donors at the end of 2024, right? And what I want to point out is that, oh my gosh, we have Mondelez, Mars, Hershey, great for Guittard being here, Mr. Beast, right, which is part of Tony's open chain, Souton, which is a cocoa trader, Touton, which is a cocoa trader. But, let's go take a look at, what do Mondelez, Mars, and Meiji, Lindt, Hershey, right, Ferrero, what do their businesses look like? What do their businesses look like? And so we're going to go back to not this post in DIA, but we're going to go back to the candy industry. Global top 100. So these are the top 100 snack, candy, and confectionery companies in the world for calendar year 2024, I believe, is the way they've done this. So number one, Mondelez, right? $36 billion across their entire reported. So chocolate bars, chocolate covered cookies and wafers. Mars, just in their confectionery business, 23 billion. I don't know that it includes pet food, but Mars has got other businesses. I think they own Purina, for example. If not Purina, they do have a pet food division and other things like that. So 36 billion, 23 billion. So the top two companies, like 59 billion. Ferrero is also on the list. That's a 19. So that's what, 78 billion. Nestle's on the list. So we've got 4 companies on the list, and we're at 90 billion in sales. We had 5 companies. We're at 101 billion. Pilates, I don't think, is on the list of supporters, but we're 107, so we're 108 plus 6, that's 114. So in the top 10 companies that are in the global, the candy industry global top 100, there's like 110 billion in revenue. And what they're doing is they and all the other companies, let's get rid of this one. You know what? I am going to have to go and swoop away from this because when it comes to DIA, I lost the browser tab that I was in. I have many of them open. But I can go here, right? So look at all these companies. And here's another bit of research that you can do. Go to the scorecard, the 2025 chocolate scorecard, and find out how many of these are listed in the scorecard. Well, certainly Tony's Chocolonely is listed as the number 1, but where is Olam? Where is Berry Callebaut? Cargill's not on the list. Simois is the largest French chocolate company you may have never heard of before. Fair Trade is supporting their partners and donors. What does this mean? Are these financial partners? Are they providing services? What kind of coordination are they doing here? What you'll do is you'll find that there are, maybe 200 billion in sales are represented by the companies that are on this list, and they're giving 15 million. And not all of that 15 million comes from these companies, right? So when you think about it, the presence of every single one of these companies on this list is, in fact, an attempt at greenwashing. What they're trying to do is they're trying to burnish their reputation by being a part of this organization. They're polishing their they can report that we're a part of the International Cocoa Initiative, and we're building our CLMRS, or we're using the ICI CLMRS. For example, I think Tony's has got an enhanced CLMRS, which is built using ICI support, but it's not necessarily the ICI CLMRS, right? But they're using this to burnish their reputation, right? That we're a part of this global fight against illegal labor. But when you go take a look at especially Ghana, which is where the cocoa economy is very tightly controlled by COCOBOD. We talked about that earlier this week under Mario Kart economics as a monopsony. COCOBOD is a regulator, so they're writing the rules of the game, but they're also going to be a participant in the game as well. And so, they're going to write the rules to benefit themselves and the people who support them. It's a real problem there, right? But none of these people, right, or what I would really like to understand is, to what extent are these people actually addressing the root problems that were talked about in the Cocoa Radar report, right? Which is, oh, interesting. This is a version which I didn't update with a link to the report. So let's go here and go back. So as you might imagine, these are fairly complicated things to put together. So if we look at this, here's the Cocoa Radar report. Here's what Tony Myers is writing about. And he's saying the root cause is beyond the farm. So we take a look at what the International Cocoa Initiative is doing. We take a look at what ICI members are paying all of 15 million Swiss francs, $17 million for over the course of a year, right? These are companies that collectively have sales well north of $100 billion, and not just in chocolate and cocoa, but across their snack and confectionery portfolios, right? But if we take a look at the combined sales, probably well over $200 billion, and between them, they can come up with 17 million, right? But they're not addressing the root causes. There's nothing in what the International Cocoa Initiative is doing that addresses the root cause of low household income, right? In Ghana, they can't, right? In Ghana, the farm gate price is set by the government. And as long as there is any restriction in the movement of the farm gate price compared with the market price, then they're not going to be able to address the issue of low household incomes. We do have this notion of the living income reference price. Who decides what living income is? Who decides what the living income differential is? How often is it updated? All of that kind of stuff. There's nothing about what the International Cocoa Initiative is doing that's addressing the fundamental challenge, right? The root cause, one of 3 root causes, right, that has been identified, right? In the report itself, they're not doing anything to address low household income. They're certainly not doing anything, and they can't address anything having to do with inflation, right? So if the cost of money is going up, if the price of things is going up, and the rise in the farm gate price is not at least matching what there's no cost of living adjustment, automatic cost of living adjustment in the farm gate price, right? The farmer is always going to be behind, and nobody is throwing out blue shells, right, to adjust the game, right? The living income differential, things like the fair trade premium only apply to the farmers that are fair trade certified, or the cooperatives that are fair trade certified. And so if fair trade was such a really good thing, everybody would be certified because it would be a good thing. Why aren't all farmers fair trade certified? In part because the people who are buying cocoa don't want to pay the premium for it. They don't want to spend that much money, right? They're not interested in solving the problem, right? Their entire business model depends upon the farmers, right, earning as little as possible, right? They need to maximize the return to shareholders, right? Now, Mars may be privately held, but it exists in an economy where they have to compete against for-profit organizations. They have to compete against Mondelez and other companies like that. And so they need to engage in sourcing practices which enable them to compete on a price basis when it comes to sourcing their ingredients. And if they're paying 3x what Mars is paying because Mars is private, or if Mars has to pay 3x what they're currently paying because Mondelez is a public company, right? I mean, they're all going to engage in the same practices. It is, even though Mars does not have a fiscal responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility to maximize return to shareholders, right? The same way that Mondelez and other publicly traded companies do. There is still the pressure right, to produce products that are price competitive in the marketplace. And so they are driven to engage in similar kinds of practices. Right? And there's a trickle down effect in all of this that I'm going to be discussing as part of a new 3-part series that I'm working on in terms of the changing landscape of cocoa sourcing around the world, which is you've got a company like Ecom, which is a very large company. They've been around for donkey's years. I mean, 150 or something like that, maybe that order of magnitude. And they're a commodities trader, and they deal in coffee and cocoa and many, many other things. But they have a specialty cocoa brokerage called Cacao Latitudes. And how can you disassociate what it is that Cacao Latitudes is from what it is that Ecom is? So is Ecom engaged in the same sourcing practices across its entire business as Cacao Latitudes is? And is there any connection between, oh my gosh, what it is that the relationship between Tony's Chocolonely and Barry Callebaut? It's a huge question. Tony's Chocolonely's cocoa bean supply chain may be separate from Barry Callebaut's cocoa bean supply chain, but all of Tony's Chocolonely's, all of their beans are being transformed into butter in a Callebaut factory in Africa, or into chocolate at the Barry Callebaut factory in Wieze, Belgium. You cannot separate the fact that Barry Callebaut doesn't have the same ethical standards that Tony's Chocolonely does, right? And to some extent, are we going to discount, right, that relationship? Are we going to ignore the relationship? Can we make the same question about Cacao Latitudes and Ecom? And that's going to be one of the issues that I'm going to be discussing. But if we go take a look over here at the annual report, we'll see that, Ecom is here, right? And so one of the questions we might have is, are there other sort of specialty cocoa sourcing subsidiaries, right? Where we'd say, oh my gosh, for example, is a company like Cacao Latitudes able to take, I'm hesitate to say this, unfair advantage of the fact that they are owned by Ecom in fee simple, right? As a way to be able to use their market position to be able to discriminate against suppliers they think that are competitive, using predatory pricing practices. So that's one of the issues that I'm going to be talking about in this new 3-part series on the changing landscape in cocoa sourcing. But go take a look, all right, at these companies: Barry Callebaut, Cargill, Semois, right, Ecom, right, Ferrero, Mars Wrigley, Marks and Spencer's, Linton Sprigli, Mondelez, Meiji, right, OFI, Olem Foods International. So Jacobs Foundation, actually, this is Jacobs Suchard. The Jacobs family is very, very closely connected to the Barry Callebaut company. So it's really, really interesting to go take a look at this and sort of understand literally what it is that's going on. And I realize that I have been talking about something you can't see, which is this page. Go and take a look at this, and you'll see who these companies are. Try to understand what some of the relationships are, tease them out, and what does that mean in terms of the relationships, and what are the resources? So collectively, all of these companies have the resources to be able to solve the problem, which are identified in the Cocoa Radar report. Collectively, they have the resources to address low household income. They have the resources. I can't talk about inflation, but there are the resources to address issues associated with limited access to education and healthcare. But it's not just healthcare security, and it's not just access to education. It is water security and food security and a whole bunch of other issues. But because of the nature of the agricultural system and the economic system, they're both extractive. Right? So their goal is to extract as much value as they possibly can in a short period of time. And they're not regenerative or not restorative generally, which is where I think we need to go to, which is we need to make sure there are enough resources in the system to be able to support, right, the health of farms and farmers, because without farms, without farmers, we're not going to thrive, right, in the long run. And so that's what I wanted to walk you through today, which is why I think that the ICI 2024 annual report and the 2024 members reporting initiative are disappointing. They say the obvious, right? They say what we would expect they say. We're a non-governmental organization. We are a nonprofit. We rely on the problem to support our business model. If we actually solve child labor, we disappear, right? There's no reason for us to exist, right, if there's no illegal child labor anymore. So we're going to, A, make sure that we describe we're making progress, yay, but there's still a lot to do, right? Because that way they're going to get donations. Having said that, right, that's just the business thing, right? There is value in what there is. So, as much as I talk about what it is that Tony's is and doesn't report and doesn't do, right? They have been one of the most successful companies in beating this drum, right? You buy our chocolate, you help eradicate illegal labor, right, in the supply chain, right? It's one of the reasons why Jimmy Donovan, Mr. Beast, right, aligned Feastables with Tony's Open Chain, right, so that he can take advantage of this. And he's got a really good story that he can tell his 400 million YouTube followers, right? It's a really, really good story. Are they trying to do good? I think that they are. Yes, I think that they want to do good, right? Could they do more? Could they do better? The answer is absolutely yes, in my opinion, right? That if they actually focused on doing good rather than the appearance of doing good, right, that everybody would be better off. Historically, chocolate has been cheap, right? And that's a problem, right? Right. Now that chocolate is actually getting closer to what it actually costs to manufacture, what are big companies like Mars and Mondelez doing? They're abandoning cocoa farmers. They're looking for alternatives. We're saying, thank you very much for let us abuse you and take advantage of you for the last 50 to 500 years. But now, right, our entire business model is based on the fact that, we've been exploiting you. And now that it's no longer as financially rewarding to exploit you, we're going to move to something else, right? And we're going to move to something else, and we're not going to take responsibility for fixing the harms that we have done exploiting you over the last period of time. And so that's the challenge. So go take a look. Do you agree with me? I mean, you may say, hey, Clay, this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. You're talking about this stuff. You're talking about the International Cocoa Initiative, and here's the post for today's episode. Nothing about what you're saying makes sense. Or maybe you agree with me. Let me know in the comments. If you are a member of the Chocolate Life, you can go and continue the conversation down in the comments at the bottom of the page, the member discussion. Please go become a member, because this episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, is sponsored by you, the members of the Chocolate Life. You can click on the join button. There's always a free membership, right? And there's been this free tier of membership since the beginning, back in January 2008. That's how long the Chocolate Life has existed. I've been doing episodes of the Chocolate Life on Clubhouse, the Chocolate Life Live, and Pod Save Chocolate now for almost 4 years. No, longer than that. It's been a while that I've been doing these. And so my ability to do these is based entirely on the support of members like you. And if you're watching this on YouTube, do all the YouTube things, like, subscribe, hit the button, comment, share, do all those things to help the algorithm and to help it grow. And as you can see right now, it says, if you have a suggestion for an article, topic, or episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, click to let us know. You don't have to be a member to do that. You can click on that. It'll open up your email client, and you can send me a message saying, hey, Clay, I'd like you to talk about X. I'd like you to talk about Y. I'd like you to talk about Z. And I read all of them. and I'll be happy to go and consider your request for a topic in the future. And with that, that's all I have to say about today's topic. But please, the goal here, again, is not necessarily to criticize these companies, although that's a large part of what it is that I want to do, right? My primary goal here, as is my goal in many episodes of Pod Safe Chocolate, is to make you a better consumer of this information, right? I want you to be able to look at these things and go, what are they trying to steer us away from? What are they not telling us? Where they want to point us over here, and here's something bright and shiny, and they want to do that because there's something which is not so bright and not so shiny over there. If they are quoting a statistic, go take a look at the statistic. If they're making a representation, go look at their annual report. Go look to find things up, right? You should be doing these because you care about chocolate, right? Like I do. I care about chocolate. I've been doing this for as long as I have, and I hope you do. As I say, this is all about, right, supporting for chocolate lovers of all flavors. And that I'm going to end the episode for today, right, with my closing statement, which is if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. We do talk about serious topics here, right? But chocolate is all about enjoyment and having fun and sharing our enjoyment with chocolate with others. And with that, everybody, ciao, until the next time.